Welcome to the Final Four of the North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers Discussion Meet. I am Lindsay Gay of Greene County Young Farmer and Ranchers Committee. I will be serving as room chair for this round. At this time, I ask out of respect for all of the competitors that each of you turn off your electronics. Also, please keep distractions as minimal as possible to allow the concentration of the competitors to not be broken. Serving as moderator for this final round is Bill Walker from Iredell County, North Carolina Farm Bureau's 2014 Young Farmer and Ranchers Discussion Meet winner. Serving as timer for this round is Jeremy Lee of North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee from Catawba County. The winners of each round robins have advanced to this final round. The topic is, how do we balance agriculture's water needs with maintaining vibrant communities? How do historical water rights influence this discussion? The judges, timer, and competitors have been briefed as to the rules of the competition. I yield control of this competition to your moderator, Bill.
Thank you, Lindsay. We appreciate all of you taking time to attend this competition. Your support is appreciated by the competitors. Competitors, please come take your place up front. Writing is allowed after all competitors have been seated. As our room chair has mentioned, the competitors have been briefed on the competition and realize that their general discussion should be directed toward each other rather than the audience. In my role as moderator, I will not attempt to control or direct the discussion. Remember, this discussion is meant to simulate a committee meeting, not a panel discussion with point, counterpoint, and an active moderator. As such, I will not intervene unless or until disparaging or inappropriate remarks are made. With that in mind, the burden is on the competitors to moderate themselves and conduct themselves in a cooperative and congenial manner. Competitors, congratulations on your advancement to the final round. The competitors for this round are Justin Gillespie, John Burt, Jessica Morgan, and Kevin Wilson. We will begin this discussion with 30-second opening statements for each competitor. Following the opening statement will be 25 minutes of open discussion, followed by 1 minute of quiet time with the competitors to prepare their 1-minute closing statement. Competitors, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statements. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. The timer will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by standing. You may now begin.
Water is essential to all life, and it's especially essential to agriculture. We use it to produce food and fiber for the world. But how do you balance those needs with maintaining vibrant communities? Today, my counterparts and I will discuss how do we do that. How do we go about ensuring that agriculture has the water we need to produce the nation's food and fiber while still making sure we have the water we need to maintain vibrant communities?
Water is the most important part of many of our lives, not only in vibrant communities, but agriculture as well. I look forward today to discussing some possible solutions to this issue. I believe it's important that we need to remember that all parties be at the table when these policies are being discussed and that moderation is kept in mind.
It's hard to believe we're having water issues after the last 3 years we've gone through in North Carolina. Some areas have been fairly dry, but most have been abnormally wet. But it's a battle that's going to be looming here probably in the next few years where urban meets rural areas. I've witnessed this in Iraq while I was deployed with the Army, and the water issues there are very similar, I believe, to what we're going to be facing here shortly.
Water rights issues haven't yet hit the East Coast like they have impacted the West Coast, but it is on the horizon, and we have to be ready for it when it comes. Farm Bureau and our gentleman up here, we are ready to discuss this today as we take it on, making sure that we are present at the table when these decisions are met, both locally, state, and federally.
You have heard the opening statements. The competitors may now proceed with the discussion. Competitors, please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
You know, back in 2012, the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management had a meeting talking about this very subject, water. How are we going to address it in the future? You know, collectively, the group that came for the meeting manages over 5 million acres of farmland. You know, one of the key statements that they came up with from that is if we cannot balance this need for water with our communities and agriculture, it's going to have some pretty profound effects on us. 3 of the largest things that they came up with was, number 1, it's going to be scarce because we're not going to have that supplies. Number 2, it's going to be costly to the consumer. And number 3, it's going to make us more reliable on foreign produce and foreign goods that with it will carry an attendant risk for possible disease and illness. So this is something we really need to dig deep into to make sure that, number one, we're able to do and continue agriculture in our great nation, but number two, to ensure the health of our nation.
Kevin, I believe that the conference you speak of speaks a lot of moderation, taking into consideration not only our ag demands, but the demands of our consumers, our vibrant communities that sometimes on a day-to-day basis, us in agriculture, we may forget about. And I think it's important that we remember that while our priorities are watering livestock and irrigating crops, their priorities may be having a clean BMW or the greenest grass in the community. And when we sit down at these conferences and these forums, and it may be even a county thing or a state thing, yes, we have to represent ag, we have to take up for agricultural uses, but we need to have those folks at the table as well.
And that's a good point, Justin. I feel like many people, especially from public perception side, they see ag they perceive that ag is overusing water. They think that agriculture is just we're letting the hose run out into the pasture there, and that's how we're watering things. But that's not true. There's some studies done down east in eastern North Carolina that said that ag actually only made up 2% of their water usage, and public perception estimated that of over 50%.
You know, you're exactly right. And, Jay Fedlingetti with the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology gave one of the TED Talks. And he actually gave it on this. And a lot of times people are so quick to point towards agriculture. It's your fault that we don't have any water. But you know what? It's really not one person's fault.
It's not one person's fault. You talked about people wanting clean BMWs or green grass. While I was serving in Iraq, we had an issue that came up where there was flooding in the cities, where people were tapping into water lines, and all of the agricultural land was all dry. The farmers couldn't grow anything, and the people were starving. That was one of the projects that we were involved with while we were there, was trying to get water back to these rural areas, get the water under control in the cities, and get it back out to the rural areas so that we actually feed their population.
John, I think that's important. I think sometimes we got to bring education to the table. People forget that when farmers use water, that product is then passed on to them. Their vegetables, their milk, their meat, all of those things were produced by the use of water. Sometimes those consumers, they fail to remember that. So I think if we can help them understand, yes, this dairy farmer needs more water use than per a family in a township. However, they still receive that water. It's just in a different form.
And that's
it's
a good
milk.
point, Justin. Especially, I think the point I want to make about the question is balancing vibrant communities and what actually makes up a vibrant community. Is it everybody having green grass? Is it everybody having a swimming pool? Or what are their water needs in a vibrant community? My husband's from Idaho originally. His parents have water rights to a canal, and there you have to irrigate everything. You need to irrigate to have a green lawn, to have a fruit tree out back. So what institutes a vibrant community, and how does that differ across the United States?
Well, you're exactly right, Jessica, because, I read something on the internet. California last year, actually in the past 3 years, has used 12 million acre feet a year of water. Of that, 2 million was attributed to agriculture, while 10 million was contributed to domestic use.
Kevin,
in Wake County, I'm sorry, I'll get you in a second. In Wake County, Farm Bureau's taking on a partnership now with the county with a water use commission that has just been started by our county commissioners. Of course, it's a very urban county where we are, and they realize that water is going to be an issue in the future. Farm Bureau was the first participant that is in the ground level of the commission. Jackie Thompson, our president, is the first named member of it. And it's good to see they are consulting with agriculture, and they want agriculture to be at the table when we're talking about how to balance the use of urban and agriculture.
And that's a
At
good
these
point, John.
tables,
They,
priorities are important, even if it's a state. It needs to be state by state, because as we've discussed, Western states have different issues than we do. So these folks need to be at the table. But when we're at this table, I think it would be useful if state by state we come up with a list of priorities. When we run into these water shortage times, where are we going to put our priorities as a state? Or
I
where
think
are
we need to
put our
even go
priorities
further
as a
than that,
county?
though, Justin, because you look at how local municipalities deal with their water and how we have local municipalities that bring town water to residential areas or maybe to a poultry house or that sort of thing. Or you have a lot of people that pump out of rivers, streams, wells. So it's going to be each area, the town of Monroe or Rockingham, North Carolina is going to have very different priorities than the whole county of Anson County where I am from because it's very rural.
It's very difficult to talk about too, especially when you get into these historical water rights because, you know, somebody that's had a well on their property for 15, 20, 30 years has been drawing out of that, and all of a sudden you want to come and stick a meter on my well and start charging me for that water?
Exactly.
I mean, that's a huge issue.
Right, it's an infringement on the property rights that people have had. It's a tangible, valuable property right, particularly for the states in the West, and that's what I think North Carolina Farm Bureau has tried to get ahead of this with their policies. Basically, we don't want any registration, we don't want any meters on our equipment, on our irrigation pumps to try to meter what we're doing and try to limit what we're able to do.
But I think Farm Bureau definitely needs to be at the table when we do those types of things because they are coming in the future. For instance, the California Farm Bureau, to pay for your membership, puts your name on the water board, and that's how you get water in California, is through the Water Board Authority. And those Farm Bureau memberships can be up to from $250 to $3,000. So we're very fortunate to have our $25 membership here in North Carolina, but knowing that Farm Bureau plays such a large part in that water rights discussion in that state.
We are very fortunate, and I think that's something as Farm Bureau members we need to be looking at for the future. You know, the state has been in certain levels of drought even throughout this year. But looking to the future, as water becomes even more scarce and scarce, do we need to be looking at policy, putting in place right now at the grassroots level, saying, you know what, we don't have any water problems in this specific area right now. What happens if we do? We need to have that policy in place that's going to allow our lawmakers
Kevin, that was where I was wanting to go earlier when I started talking about priorities. You know, if we had some research from some land-grant universities or the Cooperative Extension Service, those things of saying this is what it takes for this particular area or this particular area of the county to produce sweet corn or potatoes or dairy products. We had that research to where when we come in those times of shortage of water, we had that research to look back to, and then we could say, all right, this particular farmer needs X number of gallons of water per day. We may have to cut it back on filling swimming pools. That's where I wanted to go.
But I don't
with
even
that
think we need to
priorities.
do that because I think there's definitely a time where residential areas are going to definitely need to get cut first, right? And that's what happens now when we have a drought is cutbacks get taken on residential areas. You can't water your lawn but on certain days and that sort of thing. But I feel like the ag production, we need to keep that balance. I think that ag production doesn't use up as much water as everybody thinks it does, and that we need to start at the residential municipality areas to reduce our water usage first.
And that's actually one place where I think the agriculture needs to do better. We say we don't think we use as much water. We don't know. I mean, agriculture needs to start really gauging how much water that we are using. Do we really need to use X amount of gallons to water this field when we can get just as much yield with a smaller amount?
And that's
John,
where
you
we
had
get
something to add to
historical
that?
water rights. And, out west, they do different tie-ins. So, if you buy a piece of property, it has a water deed that comes with it that says that, this is an 1892 deed. It's from the year 1892. And you get first dibs on that water for that, like a river or something like that. And then if you have a piece of property owned by a neighbor down the street, they don't get it until after you get your allotment. And that's kind of how that's historically been done in the past.
I think we really need to increase the supply, though, and there's an interesting project going on in Pitt County right now. It's called the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Plan. What they're doing is they're taking surface water during surplus times, like right now or during the winter. They can take, clean, and they're pumping it into the ground to be stored. So you're increasing the supply so you can help mitigate some of those problems that are coming up during the dry times or a drought time in an area. And I think that's something, all the data's not in yet, but I believe that's something that might be a possibility looking forward.
One of the things that you bring forth there is that's kind of thinking outside the box. And that's where we're going with technology and irrigation technology. We're doing things a lot different than we were 20 and 30 years ago. And tying that in with the vibrant communities. Our communities need to know that we are endorsing technology. We are trying to conserve water. We're not just turning on overhead irrigation when it's not needed. And how many gallons of water a day we save by using that technology. And I think when we build that relationship, we educate those communities around us, then they'll begin to endorse us.
And I think that's where Farm Bureau has a place in that. Being active in your local Farm Bureau will influence policy, which will then influence legislation. These projects are great that John mentioned, but they need funding. And where does that funding come from but our General Assembly? So the General Assembly really needs to know that this is a priority issue for the farmers in North
And
Carolina.
actually, right now, there's actually a good thing going on with the Farm Service Agency. Where they do have a program right now that is helping give assistance to farmers to build these ponds. And it's great that they're allowing us to do this, but you know what? Going forward in the future, we're going to have to become really aggressive in doing this, because when rain falls, we need to capture it. Instead of letting it run in the ditch, run off down the roads, we need to be capturing it. And like Justin was thinking, we need to be thinking out of the box here. You know, farmers have got a lot of infrastructure on their farm. You've got barns, your homes. Should we be collecting water that's coming off of those structures and using it to spray our fields or using it to water crops?
And that's a great point, Kevin. NRCS, which is federally funding, so obviously going after making sure our lobbyists here know that we need that federal funding for NRCS programs, because that's what they're about, is conservation efforts. And they do have these cost share programs to build ponds and fence out streams, water quality, but as well as water quantity, and making sure that we have enough water to use on farms.
I was just part of helping a friend on a cost share plan where fencing off some creeks, doing some feed shed areas, and stockpile manure. We think that, well, that may not be having or create more water, but we are increasing water quality on a day-to-day basis as agriculture, which means we have a greater use of that water that we do have. It's not contaminated. And again, our consumers don't know that. They don't know that farmers are voluntarily doing that on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's hard to have a conversation talking about water without bringing up the waters of the U.S. decisions that's going on right now, because a lot of farmers, I think, are concerned that the government's going to come in and in some way try to regulate any surface water or any ditch or puddle or anything else for that matter that we have. So I think there's some great concern. I think Farm Bureau has done a great job of getting the word out, and we're getting the truth out. I know in Wake County in particular, everyone knows what WOTUS is. You don't even have to go through the acronym anymore, because it's such a concern on everybody's mind.
Yeah, John, I feel like for so long we've been talking about water issues, but a lot of people on the East Coast say, well, that's a West Coast issue. That's where the dry, arid climate is. They didn't have any water out there to begin with. Why should they try to farm out there? But it is an issue that will eventually come this way, and it's getting closer and closer to the time.
Even getting in North Carolina, it's an issue that people think, well, it's very applicable in the eastern part of the state, but not the western part of the state. And I can attest to you that it is hugely relevant to us. And what's scary in my area is I tell people about it, and they've not even heard about it. And I mean, to me, this is an extremely ill-advised way to try to go about increasing water quality and quantity. But as you said, Farm Bureau has done a great job getting the word out. American Farm Bureau is still working on it, hammering on it this year, keeping up with it where it's at in the appeals court. But if that goes through, I mean, it's ill-advised. And once again, agriculture was not brought to the table. And that's one place where American Farm Bureau really pushed. They kind of kept it hush-hush when they was doing it. But now we need to get in there. We need to get in there full-fledged and have some say-so.
Kevin, that reminds me of some things that I was taught as a young boy by my grandfather in our area. Heading up a spring, piping it up, piping it out to a water trough, and then fencing off that spring to keep the cows out of it. That is water quality. Water for our communities at its basic root level. And I think it's important that again we educate folks, let them know that we're willing to do that. We're going above and beyond to keep water quality high and making it more available.
And two, something that's really important to keep in mind there is what we're discussing mostly here is surface water, but there's also the groundwater component. I mean, you have issues in California where they've grown out so much groundwater that the ground is actually settling a foot a year. Think of the problems that's going to have for the infrastructure that you have there. And I mean, when you look at it around here, we don't have that problem that much, but you've got other industries that are being very resourceful with it, such as the mining industry. Yes, they're using a lot of water. They're re-injecting some of the water back into the groundwater. And how do we go about managing these groundwaters as well as the surface waters going forward?
And I think John made a good point there about the Pitt County project utilizing the surface water and actually pumping it back down into the aquifers, because if we could utilize technology like that on a larger scale, I mean, think about how vibrant the aquifers would be under North Carolina, because we already do have such plentiful aquifers. But if we could somehow capture the excess surface water that we've had a lot of the past couple months, but if we could somehow capture that and reuse that, I mean, the technology is what's going to save us on this issue.
And when we start building things on our farms and our ranches, we need to be reminded that it's new school buildings now, they are building these reservoirs where they capturing all this water, and I think they're using that to flush toilets and after it's being filtered and things of that nature. I'm familiar with a large corporate greenhouse operation there that they collect all their irrigation water, treat it, and they're using it back to irrigate it back again. And these are things that they have done voluntarily, but it's things that we need to incorporate in agriculture, which I know we're doing some of, but you know, it's easy when we start to build that new project or that new whatever we got going on. Well, let's just do it like we've always done it.
But it's
we
not
got to be
just
open to those new
agriculture
doors.
either. If we're talking about that vibrant community section again, about how we need to not just have this new technology on the ag side, which, I mean, that's great. Love the new technology for the agricultural component, but also the residential component. I mean, that's really, you know, it needs to be a give and take on both sides. It doesn't have to be all agriculture all the time, reducing their water usage. There's plenty that needs to be done on the residential side as well.
And I think part of the issue you're going to run into is the infrastructure, because I've heard a lot of municipalities in Wade County talk about using gray water for irrigation. And the issue comes down to money. They say, well, we've got to run a separate set of lines because we can't mix the lines, and that's for obvious reasons. But I don't know if that becomes a point where you have like an impact fee or something that is actually going to say, look, we're doing something for the long term to take care of our water resources. It's going to cost a little more right now, but for the long term, it's going to secure our water resources.
You know, you're exactly right, John. As I looked around in our hometown, there's a large corporation that's taken the incentive they use a large amount of public water to mix with their dyes that they use on their cloth. They took and are capturing less than 50% of their rainwater, and the tank is like a 10,000 gallon tank, and it constantly runs over. So that just gives you a sense of how much area that we could be using to utilize and recapture this water. And I mean, when I think about water usage, I think about the old adage that they really came out with when recycling really got a hold on things. Reduce, reuse, recycle. As agriculture and as the public goes about, everyone's going to have to be mindful. We're going to have to reduce our use and use it more efficiently. We're going to have to reuse what we can, and we're going to have to recycle what we can. And sometimes in agriculture that can be easily, sometimes that can be rather costly.
Kevin, do you think that might be where Farm Bureau needs to come to the board with some policy and some litigation on some legislation that says, you know, here's some expectations we have for everyone, not just ag. And I think that's one of the things that we've said over and over and over, that everyone has to get involved and let's use these technologies as come up with this legislation and policy of expectations, and let's be forward thinking.
Yeah, Justin, I feel like the local communities are really where we're personally going to see that impact, right? Because our local municipalities are where our water is controlled at. So making sure that the local level, as Farm Bureau members, charging everybody to take an active voice in saying that water is a priority for us, and that, you know, ag use is also a priority in our rural communities. In Anson County, we are plentiful with water. We're lucky to be bordered by the Rocky and the PD rivers, and we sell water as a town, as a county, to neighboring counties who are not as fortunate with their water use. So moving down the road, that's going to impact a lot of towns, municipalities, and counties.
It's tremendously going to impact. But Justin, yeah, you are right. I think Farm Bureau needs to come to the board, and that's showing some inclusiveness there. You know what? We're going to look, how can agriculture, we're not just going to point fingers at the lay public and say, you guys need to reduce water use so that we've got more to do with. No, that's being inclusive. And I think that speaks volumes about Farm Bureau. If we can do that, we can look at the whole sector to where we're not saying, you know what, the public's wrong, we're right. We're basically saying, you know what, everybody can do better on this. Let's work together as a cohesive group and make sure that, you know what, this policy is all inclusive.
John brought forth that, you know, in his time with the military, that they worked with a lot with getting water back out to those rural areas. And I think we come to the conclusion that there's a lot of costs associated with many of the projects that we've talked about. I think we need to consider that maybe we need to start steering or redirecting some money that's coming through some grants. There's some areas I think we've probably been more than sufficient at meeting those goals, and maybe see if we can redirect those towards water quality and water abundance.
Well, another area where I think that we could really step up is encouraging private investment into these things that we could be using for water retention and reduction in use. I mean, you know, right now, it's kind of a go your own way, if you will. I mean, do what you want. But if we encourage private investment and offer some type of incentive there, that could really be something that in the future is very positive for both agriculture and our communities.
Right, Kevin, we've talked a lot here this afternoon, but what we don't want to get to the point is that we restrict our ag producers, we restrict our community members, we restrict our industries from wanting to come, wanting to produce, because if we're not careful, there's such a fine line there of balance of high expectations, but also being able to use a resource to create jobs, to create income. So I think it's important when we come to the table that we set those goals high, but we also are realistic with, yes, it's going to take some water for a company to produce their goods, and us don't restrict our company owners and our farmers, and even the American housewife and needing to wash clothes. Let's don't restrict everyone.
And I think that's a good point, Justin. And I believe that going back to the funding section of it, we really need to push our state legislatures. There's capital projects out there. A lot of this is what we're talking about with the gray water, with utilizing a different line for that. There is money, theoretically, available in legislation. It just needs to be prioritized in the right way. And so making sure that the voice is heard, that because we're not in such a dire situation right now, we don't have to make hasty decisions. We can kind of plan this out before it comes and start funneling that money towards water quantity before it becomes such a tough decision to make.
And that's one area where I'd really like for Farm Bureau to step up, and I'm speaking for myself because I need to step up in my community and get this going, is when you look at other states such as Kansas, they have a 50-year water plan. What are they going to do to increase surface water, groundwater, quality, availability? We need that. We need a plan going into the future about what that we are going to do to have more water. And looking at, like I said, at states like Kansas, I'm kind of envious. They've got on the ball. Of course, their water issues are different than us, but what's to say we're not in the same condition as them in 10 years from now?
Right. John, what do you think about possibly in North Carolina converting to some of the policies that are the other states that we've referenced today, having, if you own the land, you have water rights along with it, kind of like mineral rights in other states where they do the mining. Do you ever foresee that becoming an issue in North Carolina?
I don't really look at North Carolina as having a problem like that. I think that the states in the West have it about right, where it's a right, it has a tangible value that's to it. I would never look at trying to pull a right back from somebody that they've already had that's been established over time. And even for those states that are in the West, obviously it's their decision. Nobody in North Carolina needs to be telling somebody in California or Arizona what to do with their water rights, but certainly a state issue or even like a river valley authority or somebody that controls the water for everybody up and downstream.
I think we could have some fist fights if you started trying to attach a water right to a property after the fact, so long after, when those historical water rights were attached to those property, that's when it was homesteaded, so that's when the initial people went out and claimed that land and claimed the water rights to it. But going back to a situation where we're not in that dire situation yet, we can plan and do some things proactively before it becomes such a rough situation for us in the East Coast. And what do y'all think about maybe some of our resources, either Cooperative Extension or NRCS, the soil and water districts, starting to put out some best management practices for water use on ag operations?
Well, I do know that the Soil and Water District, we were just at the 50th anniversary banquet in Wake County, and their project of the year was that we all live in a watershed, and they were talking about the best management practices that are currently being used, and some of the things that maybe farmers and even in residential areas that people can be doing right now that don't really cost a whole lot of money, but they really improve the quantity and the quality of water, particularly, again, in an urban area where you have limited areas for water to really seep in and get back into the groundwater.
And those soil and water districts, because they work so independently, maybe that's something that we could talk about, is getting, something that's been so good in Wake County, which is a heavily urban county, but trying to get that information to some of the other counties and adapting it to meet the needs of those local areas.
Right. What are some possible solutions or ideas that you guys may have about filtration and technology? We've got sources of water. We've just not figured out how to use some of those sources. Do you have any ideas on where some technology or some resources or financial resources may come from to where we can start using some of those waters?
We know getting money like that is always a difficult stretch, as you know, Justin. You being a teacher, I'm sure you know how hard money is to come across. But that's definitely one thing. How do we filter what we already have? But another avenue may be,
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask that the audience remain silent for 1 minute to aid the competitors in their preparation. Please put down your pencils, and in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1-minute closing statement.
Water rights are something that, as you can see, when they start being discussed, can open up a whole different can of worms. I hope today that our discussion has led us to a point to where we can go back into our communities, use some of this information that we have gleaned here from this group today, and use it to enact policy that will ensure that water is available to, number one, ensure we have a sustainable agriculture future, but number two, ensure that we have vibrant, successful communities in our areas.
It's important as ag producers that we support our communities. It's essential that our vibrant communities support agriculture. I think in order for this to happen, we've discussed many possible solutions and ideas, but balance is the number one thing, communication is the number two thing, and all parties, both those vibrant communities and ag producers, must be at the table anytime that solutions, ideas, and policies are discussed or voted on.
I think it's interesting the conversation we've had today, where we've ranged from everything in the western part of the United States and within North Carolina and Wake County, where I'm also from. But some of the ideas we brought together, I think, are really interesting ideas, and it's something we all need to bring to the table, particularly in our own counties when we go back, if they haven't heard of some of these things, and things that we can insert into policy in North Carolina Farm Bureau and have them lobby for us with the General Assembly. It's a huge deal, and it crosses county lines and state lines, and it's going to be a huge issue in the years to come.
Obviously, water rights are an extension, are a complicated issue, one that many people get fired up about, and for good reason. Water is essential to life and agriculture, and they intertwine all the time. It's not just agriculture, it is promoting our vibrant communities. It's interesting to note that Farm Bureau's members are not all ag producers. In fact, the majority are not. They are associate members, and their voices need to be heard at the table too, to ensure they're vibrant communities. I enjoyed discussing it with the gentleman here this afternoon, and I believe that utilizing this new technology and the resources that we already have, such as Cooperative Extension, NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, to increase water efficiency, to start getting the word out about that we need to reduce our water usage now before the problem becomes too great.
Let's show these competitors our appreciation for a job well done. At this time, I will return control of the competition to the room chair, Lindsay.
Thank you, Bill, for a well-run competition. The judges for today's competitions are Dr. Antoine Alston, Dr. Michelle Ely, and Dr. Sandra Maddox. Now I would ask the judges to report with me to the tabulation room.
Thank you, judges and competitors. We would now like each competitor to make a brief statement about themselves and their operation.
I'm Jessica Morgan. I'm from Anson County, and I work for the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service as an agriculture agent serving livestock and row crop producers. And this fall, my husband and I have calved out our first beef heifers, so I guess we are now officially commercial cow-calf operators.
Hey, I'm John Burt. I'm from Fuquay Varina, which is in Wake County, North Carolina. I'm the 9th generation on a family farm. There was a land grant from the 1750s from the King of England. We currently board horses. We have a beef cattle operation, and we grow a wide variety of forages, primarily for the horse hay market.
I am jealous of John for his lineage. No, my name is Kevin Wilson. I live in Yancey County, small town of Burnsville. I work for a mining corporation during the day. Uniman Corporation produce high purity quartz. But in the evening, farm, I've got registered Angus cattle, burley tobacco, field corn, sweet corn, Irish sweet potatoes, and my dad and I manage about 200 acres of hay ground.
My name is Justin Gillespie. I'm an agriculture education teacher and FFA advisor at North Buncombe High School, Buncombe County. Grew up on a family farm raising beef cattle and burley tobacco. Currently, my wife and I and our 2 sons, we have our own beef cattle operation as well as we farm with my dad, and just super proud of the opportunity to support agriculture and have the help of Farm Bureau to develop the skills that we need to support agriculture.
We appreciate your support of North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers program.